Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the conversation series. I am thrilled today to have Craig Custance here with me. He's the current head of creative development at The Athletic. If you are anywhere in sports, you know The Athletic and know the content that comes from them. But he's also the author of Behind the Bench, Inside the Minds of Hockey's Greatest Coaches. And he's also done the Full 60 podcast, which has been something he has done in his past. But so excited, Craig, just for being here and taking the time with me today.
It's my pleasure, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
Yes, and coming from Detroit, you're a
Hmm.
Michigan boy. I got some Michigan roots, so I always love having some fellow Michiganders on the podcast.
No, it's good. It's finally warm here. We're about to hit the best time of the year to be in Michigan, so it's great.
Yes, yeah, it's a good time of the year. You're also a Spartan, and so
I am.
my dad is a Spartan as well. So
Oh
uh,
wow,
I bleed green and white as well.
well, that's good. You've been properly indoctrinated.
I
That's
have
good to
been trained for the last
hear.
27 years of who to cheer for on Saturdays.
That's great. Good. Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad we've got that established early here.
Yes, yeah, we have allegiance here on the
That's right.
between you and
That's
I.
good.
I always like to set the stage and first just start with your passion for
Mhm.
sports and where you started in the world of sports.
Oh wow. So yeah, I mean, I've been working in sports my whole career. I went to Michigan State, graduated in '99, which now is a long time ago. With a journalism degree, with always the hope of working in sports. Just when you grow up in Detroit, it's all around you constantly. I mean, you can't avoid it, from college football Saturdays to Lions to Tigers. It's Red Wings.
All
So
the animals. You cover
all
all
the we've
the
got
animals,
all the animals in
right?
Detroit. And so it's I mean, it's just a rite of passage here. And I always grew up like I'm probably more passionate about writing and reporting and journalism, but thought it would be really cool and fun if I could pair it with sports and maybe never have to work an actual job in my life. And we're whatever, a couple decades into it, and it's worked out. So
Good.
I loved, growing up, loved the newspapers, would, get the news and the free press and spread them out on the ground and read you read it cover to cover. And so, I mean, the industry has definitely evolved in my time, in my
Yeah.
career. I thought when I started, if I could work at a newspaper for 30 years, I'd be happy. And obviously
That's
that's
changed.
not the world that we live in anymore. So it's been awesome. It's been a great run.
I love that. My dad, much the same way. He's got a bunch of the big free press papers from Pistons to Tigers and Lions, all of it. I want to hop into first of all your book, Behind the Bench.
Mhm.
You're covering some very familiar names that if people have been following hockey for the last 20 something years, Mike Babcock, Ken Hitchcock, uh, Claude Julien, and
Mhm.
just a few other names. First of all, why hockey and why write this book?
Yeah, so I was in Atlanta for 10 years at the Journal Constitution, and that's where I kind of got my break in journalism, doing everything from high school cross country to
Okay.
college football to NFL.
Yeah.
And my first job was uh, as a professional beat writer, was covering the NHL's Atlanta Thrashers. And um, rest in peace or
But
whatever.
that's a throwback. That's a throwback that
It's a
people haven't
throwback. I know
people haven't heard
that's how
that
long.
name in a long time.
Yeah. So I was the beat writer for the Thrash. I want to say in like 2007,
Yeah.
2008, that era, and just loved the world of hockey. Like, just found that it's of all the major sports, it's the smallest, and I felt like probably the most approachable in terms of the athletes. Like, I could walk into the locker room, the dressing room at Phillips Arena, and was one of two or three people in the media there, so I could just sit down and get to know the players. And at my heart, like, I like to tell stories, and I could just dive into it in a way that you couldn't, going to a Falcons practice or whatever, where you're just mobbed with cameras. And so I just liked that about hockey, and I think it allowed me to do a better job covering the team, and it provided me opportunities. I ended up getting a job at ESPN as a national hockey writer, and it all kind of started with kind of getting my chops on the beat in Atlanta. And so when it was time to write a book, it was, my experience at that point. I'd been covering hockey for almost a decade,
Yeah.
and I have a real one of my passions is in kind of leadership, personal development. I love that space. I love learning about people and their paths, and that's what the podcast I did was really about at its
Yep.
heart. And so I just found in the NHL space, coaches, I mean, they could articulate it. They could talk about that space really well.
Yeah.
Kind of the hook with that book that I did was essentially I'm going to sit down with a coach, watch a game with them that was really their defining moment.
Yep.
In the case of like a Mike Babcock, it was the 2010 Olympic gold medal game where
Mm.
Sidney Crosby scores that overtime goal
Yep.
to win gold for the Canadians in Vancouver. And really, it was just a attempt to get time with, these coaches, right? Like it was, when they agree to watch a game with you, you're going to get a couple hours, you're going to get some great stories, and then oftentimes it would end up being a conversation after, and
Yep.
they would connect me with people in their lives, and it was great, and I got to learn a lot about leadership, a lot about coaching, even just a lot about hockey. Like when you sit there and you watch a game with somebody at that level, with Mike Sullivan, who had won back-to-back Stanley Cups with the Penguins. I sat down with him and John Tortorella, who they were really close friends,
Yeah.
had been connected for years. Like people forget about that now. Like Mike Sullivan is his own coach, but for years he was always really attached to
Oh
to
my gosh. Yeah.
sports, and it was just a really fun experience. And when I am enjoying writing the most is when I can just bring a reader with me on some sort of experience I'm doing. Did that again. I've got another book coming out in the fall, which is with similar concept, spending a lot of time in the world of management and ownership in the
Cool.
hockey space.
Yeah.
And same thing, just did a lot of cool things behind the scenes with people, and hopefully bringing the reader along the way. So it's fun.
Very cool. Oh, I can't wait to read that one when it comes out because I think it's so interesting to hop in the mind of it's one thing for a coach who's, on the ice and is in
Hmm.
practices and watching tape and being with players all day, but to get in the mind of management, it's a different world because there's so many larger pieces that they are having to deal with that I just think not everybody is aware of.
It was really eye opening for me, and it selfishly why I did it is I got into management myself. Like my
Yeah.
career has evolved at post ESPN at the Athletic. I'm now managing a large staff at the Athletic, and so I was like, boy, if I can spend some time with Julian Brisebois, who won multiple cups with the Tampa Bay Lightning, or Tom Dundon, who started companies and is a billionaire,
Yep.
and he's definitely I try to find people that do things a little bit differently from the norm. And again, they were, the hockey world tends to be gracious with your time if you show interest, and spent a lot of time with 10 different people in that universe. And it was just great. Like, just, you're right, there's things that you would never think about,
Yeah.
and then when you're spending time, you get to see how they operate, how they think differently than we do, really. And so it was a really cool process.
We're in Stanley Cup playoffs right now. I was
Mhm.
at one of the Hurricanes game last night. Um,
Sorry for your
yeah,
loss there.
thanks. That was painful. I was like, not Trocheck, not two games back to back of him scoring in overtime. But that's what he's good at. But so I was just surfing on Twitter and somebody called him Tim Dundon, and everybody kind of around us started dying laughing. And it wasn't a Hurricanes fan, it was
Yeah.
somebody who was, but it was like somebody was like, I dare you to go call him Tim Dundon to his face. He somebody was like his half zip might actually combust. Um,
That's
if
I
you,
like that about no matter where you see Tom, he's got the same, like, in the book I called it his uniform. He's got his quarter zip hurricane, he's got his black Hurricanes hat, he always has his like his earpiece, he's always on the phone. This is a
yep,
guy, the way he operates is fascinating. Like, he's probably the most hands-on owner in the NHL, and
fantastic.
I think either if you work for him, you appreciate that,
Yeah,
or it would drive you crazy and you can't do it. Like, like, if we worked for him, we would already have gotten 3 calls. He just wants to know what's going on. He has a lot
yeah,
of opinions. He questions everything constantly.
yeah,
And I think you know, they might not have had the playoff success, like they don't have a Stanley Cup yet under him, but I do think you could argue his approach is working.
Yeah,
It's been a fascinating
I
to watch from the
agree.
outside.
It's been fascinating to even hear from Brenda Moore the fact of like Waddell and Dundon both bring him in for conversations. He was like, this was not happening years ago before Dundon
Mhm.
came in. He was like, it's a great partnership. He's like, they genuinely care to hear about what other people in the organization have to say. So I think it's sometimes a refreshing thing to hear coming from ownership that they care about what other people are in the organization have to say and what their opinions are.
He does, and I think that doesn't always mesh with how people want to run an organization. And so, I mean, if you remember, Ron Francis was there, and so if you know, Ron is somebody who has experience and probably wants to run a hockey team a certain way. And if you have your boss questioning it and then going to, you know, the coach and then going around you, I think that can create,
It's messy.
you know, it could be messy. Really, it can be. Like I don't know. I don't know if it's a leadership style you'd want to emulate, like, but it fits his personality. I mean, it's the only way that Tom Dundon can do it. Like
Yeah.
when you talk, like you just see,
Yeah.
this is how he has to operate. But yeah, it's everybody's involved. Like he's calling the coaches, he's calling the GM, he's calling the assistant GM, he's calling the trainer, he calls media, he calls agents, he calls up, like he's constantly getting information like
I love it.
nonstop.
I love it. He wants to be in it, which makes as a fan perspective, you're like he cares. He cares about this organization, and he's made it really clear. He's like, we're not going anywhere. We're not leaving, and we all are kind of sitting here
Yeah.
going, well, we've heard this before, but now you're like, okay, we trust you. We trust that this is we're here to stay. So it's really refreshing to hear from an owner just the things that he has to say to all of us, and it's nice. It's a
Yeah.
nice take to get that your team's not leaving your city.
I know, like, and it's funny because in a non-traditional hockey market, that's just a real thing. And
It
you know,
is.
I mean, I lived it in Atlanta, and we've seen it
Yeah.
with Arizona, and you don't you don't hear that anymore with Carolina. Like that was, you know, that it seems like any chance there is for a conversation to talk about moving these southern teams or these
Yeah.
non-traditional teams, that conversation happens. And Tom, you know, from the get-go has said like he's committed to this market. He's
Yeah.
in Texas. I think a lot of us like
He
you could
is.
have made an argument he'd have been better off moving it to Houston or whatever, personally and
Yeah.
professionally, but he's in on that team.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's interesting.
If you were to go and do a round two of behind the bench with this new wave of coaches that's come in,
Yeah.
who would be the coaches that you'd want to talk to?
Oh, it's a good question. You know, the number one would be John Cooper,
Oh God, yeah.
um who I've gotten to know through the years. And John, actually, when I was doing this is how long ago this book was. It's and how old I am. You
26.
know, when
Yeah.
I'd approached him about it, and he was at that time, his big accomplishment, he had broken the record in the AHL as the most consecutive wins, and he was this up and coming coach. And I said to him, I'm like, John, I want you to be kind of the few, you know, like I wanted to have a coach that wasn't a lifer. You know, you mentioned Ken Hitchcock and Mike Babcock and some of these others who were kind of the old school. And I was like, you know, I wanted to represent the next generation.
Yeah.
And I think John was just like, hey, I don't think I've won anything yet to warrant being a part. You know what I mean? Like he was very
Yes.
humble about it. He was like,
Yeah.
I don't know if you need a dedicated chapter to somebody whose biggest success had been in the HL to that
Right.
point. And of course, he goes on to win multiple Stanley Cups
Back to
and
back. I'm like,
back
dude.
to back. He's really good. He's almost like the perfect modern coach in that he pushes the players. But he also is such a great communicator. He has the respect. Like if you spend any amount of time with, like, selfishly, if I were to do another version of it, it would just be fun to spend an afternoon with John. Like
It would be.
he's just you know, he's a guy you like to hang out with. He's really he's funny, and I think that reflects in the teams that he has. Like you know, he's players want to play for him, and
Yep.
had a ton of success over the years. So definitely would start with him. You know, Bruce Cassidy in Vegas is another one who I think is really interesting. And you know, one of those guys that it's just fascinating to talk about leadership
Yeah.
in all the topics that I love. And you can tell when the few times I've talked to him about it, he's into it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, there would. I don't know if I have another one of those in me just because it was a lot of work, but it would be. I would start with those two coaches for sure.
I love it. I've, growing up, never been a Boston Bruins fan, but I have a immense appreciation for Bruce Cassidy and everything that he's done in his
Hmm.
career. Um, and him going to Vegas last year is his first year and winning that cup. I was like, good for you, Bruce. I was like, way
Yeah,
to do it.
he did it, and that's not again. I don't want to
It's not
turn
a
this into my
traditional
next.
market.
It's not a traditional market, and one of the things, I did spend some time there for this new book with George McPhee, who's the president of the team there, and
Yeah,
we actually talked a lot about coaches and his hiring, the way he's hired in the past. I mean, if you think back to Washington, it didn't always go particularly well. Like there was
totally.
some kind of fits and starts there, and I think he learned a lot about basically, he said he's not messing around with coaches. Like if there's a great coach available, he'll go get them. And
Yeah,
they've had some turnover, and they've had great coaches like Gerard Gallant came
yeah,
through Vegas,
yeah,
Pete DeBoer, and now you have Bruce Cassidy. Like these are good coaches
yeah,
that they made some tough decisions on, and like made changes. And I think that's something George learned over time was,
yeah.
he he's constantly going to be trying to get the best at every position, including coaching.
I love it. Well, I can't wait to read this one when this one comes out this fall. Hop into your full-time job at the Athletic.
All right.
You're now head of creative development. Beforehand, you were editorial director there.
Mhm.
You've got 25 years in the world of journalism and in sports. First of all, with your extensive background, what sets the Athletic apart from other news sports outlets out there right now?
Yeah, I mean, what I just love about the athletic and the staff and what we do is it's always based on the journalism, and that's at our heart. And we're a New York Times company now, and it was the perfect transition for us because that's how they operate. And so it's always about the reporting. It's always about the storytelling. We really make an effort on any platform, whether it's an audio or video or in the written word, to do things differently and to take the time and the investment and try to tell stories that other people aren't telling.
Yep.
And I just, people have responded to that, in terms of subscribers and audience, and we've just keep growing. So I love that the staff is so passionate about that. You just have people that love journalism, that love storytelling, that love reporting, are competitive about breaking news. Like you need to have that rounded out staff. And I mean, I would stack ours against anybody. Like I love what we're doing there.
As much as you have so many outlets out there, I always find myself going to the Athletic because instead of just giving like a small snapshot of what is happening, like the Athletic, you guys tell a full story. And I think to your point, your love for storytelling, I want to understand some of the background behind
Mhm.
some of these things. And I think sometimes when we're just like somebody's been traded, I'm like, okay, but what has happened here to lead to that? And so I feel like I get that every time I read The Athletic, whenever there's a big story or it's just a great feature piece, whatever it may be, it's a really beautiful piece that you get to read and gain knowledge on.
Yeah, and I mean, that's all by design, right? Like if there's a coaching change or a regime change in a team, I know these reporters and editors have been planning for months and anticipating it and doing the research. And like there's, it's become almost like a joke. Like something will happen and we'll just drop a massive story, and it's because these people are plugged in, and these reporters, they've already done the homework, and they know there's this, fans want to know the inner workings, and they're passionate about their teams. And yeah, and it's a credit to the company that they are still. I mean, we talked about the changing media landscape. It's not easy to do this kind of journalism, and but I do think it's what sets us apart as a company.
Now, as your team has grown and gotten bigger in the Athletic overall, how do you and your team approach, keep enhancing the platform's content, making sure that quality is staying how
Hmm.
you guys want it to? How do you maintain all of those things?
Yeah, it's just being very intentional with everything we're doing. If we're launching something new, it's not rushing it out.
Yeah.
We're the creative development department, which I oversee now, is all of our non-platforms. So it's audio, video, it's newsletters, all the space that that we're getting into or growing and expanding. And we're just you just want to be very careful. Like there's a high standard. We
Yes.
want to, if we're going to launch a new podcast or we're going to launch something in video, we want to have the same high standard we do on the written side or on the app. So it's just kind of, we do have the luxury of the time to work it through and pilot and do
Yeah.
chemistry tests and do all kinds of
Oh,
things that
good
I think
stuff.
are key to putting out a quality product.
Now, you were talking about the things that you have learned, you had to go learn from a leadership standpoint and talking
Mhm.
with people. What are some of the things that you did specifically go do, the people you talked to say, "Hey, here's kind of what I'd love to get more knowledge about as I'm stepping into this higher role."
I think it's a combination of things. Like one of the things I like to do is I'll just sit, can we go do something to see how you operate? Or, I like to be in the person's kind of native space. And so like we'll go back to the Tom Dundon example. It's, it was, they were playing the playoffs. I'm like, can I just come and sit in the suite with you while I just want to see how he's
Yeah.
talking to employees and interacting, and and then just sit down and then do a proper interview. But I always try to pair it with some like behind the scenes,
Yeah.
just so I can see, right? Like
Yeah.
you learn
Yep.
by watching
Hands
and you
on.
learn by story, right? So I try to do that as much as possible. And then with the athletic, it's in my role, I'm constantly reading. I think that's a big part of being a manager and being a leader is kind of consuming this. And
Yes.
like right now it's an older book, but I'm reading a book called The Culture Code. And I just find other people that are into the space, and I just ask what they're reading. And oftentimes it's like, when I was in hockey, it was other people in hockey, and somebody like Lou Lamoriello has like 10 great book recommendations. And it's also just great for like, source building and relation. Like you're not, people want to talk about stuff besides the game or whatever. And you can say, hey, like, what are you reading right now? Is actually an interesting question to people. And so it's being around people, seeing how they operate, and then just putting in the time to learn.
That question is actually one of my favorites, the what are you reading right now? Because and it's my favorite to ask of people like yourself, but also CEOs and things like that. There is such a wide array of recommendations that I get
Yeah.
every time I ask because it's either something they're interested in right now, personal development or whatever it may be, but it's my favorite question to ask because I've gotten into this. And my stack of books is growing as the day carries on every time I ask those
Yeah. I it's pretty revealing. Like,
questions.
I did a story, gosh, it was a few years ago, and um, it might have been, I don't know why we were doing it. Was like some sort of package we were doing at the Athletic, and it was 100 book recommendations from people in hockey, and so it was players and manager. Like Gary Bettman gave a book and I was just like, it ended up being one of my favorite things ever because it just sparked conversations that I never would have had, and you learn about people. And one of them was, I was talking to Sidney Crosby, and I asked him the question, and I've been covering Sid since he broke into the league, and at that point, and he was talking about a history book, and I forgot what book it was, and I had no idea. He's like really into history,
Wow.
and he was enough that like the previous off season he had taken a history class at like the local school, and I'm like I had no idea Sidney Crosby's out there like
Yeah.
going to like community college or whatever. I don't know where it was, where the class was, but
He just walks
I don't know.
into class one day
Yeah,
and it's
you got
like,
Sid is
what
like
the
taking
hell?
like taking like American history at wherever. So again, it's just, I don't know, that just adds a layer of intrigue and you don't often get that from people like Sid. So I think that was one of my favorite pieces to do because you learned a lot. And then selfishly, like all of a sudden my Goodreads playlist was at had 50 new books on it too. So
I love that, but I'm sitting here, I'm like trying to imagine Sid in a classroom. I'm like, what is that even environment look? Everybody's just not even focusing on anything else but him.
I'm sure it was online. I'm sure
Sure, it
I
has to
can't imagine him walking into a lecture hall at this point in suburban Pittsburgh or something.
Yeah, somewhere. I do just want to ask you, we were talking, you were at the NFL draft in Detroit. So
Hmm.
happy that that happened in Detroit. It sounded like it was great success, and there was a whole bunch of Lions fans that represented. But when you do get to, NFL draft, NHL
Hmm.
draft, all of these bigger sporting events, what does that look like for the Athletic, for you and your team to cover these events?
Yeah, it's actually because we're a remote operation, we end up using these big events, not in the NFL draft case because the teams don't they tend to stay in their war rooms, so they're not coming to Detroit. But I'll use like NBA, the draft or summer league. One of the anytime we have a lot of teams in one place, um, we send a ton of reporters just because we really believe you have to be there, right? Like NHL draft, every NHL writer's there, and then we also bring in the editors because oftentimes this might be the one time in the year to get everyone together in the same room, and we just try to get some feedback from people. Just we'll do some panels, and we'll just use this opportunity to pair a big league event with a chance to work together as a staff, which you don't always get to do for a big kind of media remote company. And so so because of that, I've been, to baseball winter meetings and all these, NBA summer league and NHL draft. I've gone to the last several NFL combines in Indianapolis, and it's simply just to be around the writers and get to see them in the space and get their feedback face to face. And so from like a managing point of view, they're extremely valuable. And then from a reporter point of view, like there's nothing better when you have that many concentrated sources and coaches and players all in one spot. It's so invaluable as a reporter. So we invest pretty big in those big events.
I love that you guys use it as a team coming together moment. I work for a fully remote team as well, so
Hmm.
whenever we get together, it's like, oh my gosh, it's not staring at you through a screen. It's fantastic. How do you guys, as reporters, how do you guys manage that being in a fully remote world?
It's funny, I haven't been in a newsroom proper since Atlanta in whatever it would have been 2000. I left to go, went national in like 708 09. So I've just this is how I've lived. And I am jealous though. Like our team in London is in a newsroom, and so when I was there, I was there in January, and I'm like, oh, this is so great. Like the amount of work you can get done when everyone's just sitting in the same conference room, or it's so much more productive. But the way we manage, I mean, I'm on Zooms constantly. I try to use, as people come through town in Detroit, writers or whatever, it's just an opportunity for me to go down to a game and just meet up with people, or at the very least grab a coffee with them. And we try to get to New York as much as possible with the Times, owning us. We have a lot of people in New York, so it's just being proactive of using big events to get some face time and trying to gather in one place as often as you can. But it is a challenge. Like I do find there's days where I'll have like 10 Zooms and I'm like, what is it, like what even happened today? It's so I think we're still figuring it out as we go a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah, I completely agree with you though. We were just in Phoenix for like 48 hours, but we were all in this conference room. We were watching presentations and like there's so many new people being added to our team that it was one that I was like, I know who you are now. You're not just a screen, you're not
Yeah.
just a box, and I actually understand what you do for your job. So I actually can come and say, hey, can you help me with this? But it is one where I'm like picking up the laptop, going to different tables in the conference room and saying, hey, what do we need to do for this?
Yep.
Uh, and I just appreciate that time so much. I wish we had it more.
Yeah. It's it's I love, I think there's a combination of both, hybrid. I think there's probably a proper landing spot, but yeah, the amount of work you can get done in one room,
Incredible.
it's pretty it's much different.
I know this isn't a project you currently are still doing, but I do just want to hit on the Full 60 podcast. It was one
Yeah.
of my favorite podcasts to listen to because once again it gives you an insight into all these different people that are in sports that and just really honing in and paying specific attention to them, but just really want to hit on some and get some unique insights that you gain just getting to talk to all these various different figures in the hockey world, and what were some of the big things that popped out to you when you were doing this podcast?
Yeah, I mean, it was again, it was purely selfish. Like I just love to learn from these people and just bring the listener along and have these conversations. And the beauty of that podcast, it was an hour long, so people would just settle in and they were just ready to talk in a way that maybe they wouldn't after a game or after practice when everyone's so structured. And um, I think the conversations I appreciated the most was oftentimes I like to get into the path of people who are really non-traditional, and you talk to somebody who was running a team or a front office that wasn't a former player that had to kind of work their way up. And I just like to hear the stories of like, all right, how did that even start? Like, how did you get? I
Yeah.
remember doing one interview and it was like this person had written letters to like 15 different teams or whatever, and finally, you get that one response. Or I remember Chris Snow, who the late Chris Snow, who's one of my favorite people to deal with. He's a former assistant GM. He was AGM in Calgary, and just telling a story about like going down to it was an NHL general managers meeting, and he just knew all these people that could possibly hire him were in one city, and like Brian Burke was maybe the only one that agreed to meet for coffee, and Berkey was just like, all right, why should I hire you? Like just got right to the point.
Oh
And
yeah. Oh yeah.
these I love that kind of, I love like origin stories and just hearing how people that have oftentimes non-traditional backgrounds find
Yeah.
their way in, and I think you can learn a lot from that, like no matter what you're into.
It's one of the reasons I love doing this, because I'm like, yeah, I can talk to three different sports reporters who are for hockey teams, but not one of those people got to the same place that they are today. Everybody
Mhm.
has a different path. Everybody has a different story to tell. Everybody's been through different things. So that's what I love too. I'm like, what got you to where you are today? It's so insightful, because you're like, you can see how people tick in different ways and what got them to do what they're doing.
No, absolutely. Again, and I think there's always a lot to learn. You just see the initiative that people take and how much work. It's funny, there's people that we assume are like this overnight success story, and they're like, yeah, but I was actually doing this for 10 years before that overnight success happened. So
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
Well, especially with hockey players too, you're like, they've been playing since they were 4 years old when their parents put them in skates, and they're playing for years and years before
Hmm.
they're finally looked at as being a top tier player that's going to move up to AHL, NHL, whatever it may be. Um, Athletes are very interesting to hear about how they got in, because once again, it's not the same story.
Yeah, where I find athletes most interesting, and I like, to be truthful, I often gravitate to the coaching managing side, because I oftentimes athletes, it's like they're like, I don't know, I just been playing hockey since I was four. But but like where they're often really interesting is on like the fitness side, or you start talking about like the nutrition side, or really just schedules and there's a lot to learn there when you sit there and say this person. I remember Ryan Miller was fascinating to talk to, because goalies are so like specific in what they do, and he had his like next 6 months planned out like down to the minute. And like these people, like these elite athletes, are so structured and so intentional in everything they're doing. And that's when you talk to athletes, I often find like that's the area where you can hone in and get some really interesting insight.
Well, that was always, I keep coming back to Rob Brennamore, just because, growing up with the Hurricanes, he was somebody who was always a big person in the community, and him being our coach now. But he had always said during the off season that he would continue his regimen and his training, because
Mhm.
everybody would come back to the come back to the season and just be dying and gassed, and he was like,
Yeah.
I stayed ready to go. And it's ridiculous now to this day that he still does all of that. And
I
he
mean, he's in better shape than anyone that
brought the
you can
bod.
run across. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
I'm like, he owns it, he can keep it. But a lot of the players are like, we're scared to be in the weight room with him, because most of the time he does try to drag somebody in there. But it's so interesting to hear how he was from a player to now being a coach, and how he's just carried that through. So I completely agree with you. Like the fitness side, it's a little
Hmm.
funny to hear, like Brent Burns too, his backpack. and everybody's like,
I love
"What's in
that.
the backpack?" And they're like,
There's I feel like I can answer. There's some sort of coffee he's
"Yes,
got in there, and like maybe like a French press or something to make it. He's really into that kind of stuff.
yes." That's
Probably
what
a knife of some
everybody said. The
sort to like skin
coffee.
an elk. You know,
Yeah,
he's gonna be
everybody's like, "Is there an animal in there?" And everybody's like, "There's not an animal.
no, there's something hunting. If I had to
There's
guess,
something." Yes, but everybody's like, "There is." Everybody has said there is coffee in the backpack. So we're like, "Great, at least we can check that one off the
we can
first."
check the coffee. So like he's actually the opposite, you know, he's one of the most interesting people to talk to because he is not your prototypical athlete and like he's into a lot of different things. He's what I've always liked about Brent Burns is super curious. You know, and when he gets into something, like I did a story about him years ago, and when you talk to his teammates, like he would just get into like I can't think of an example right now, but let's just say it would be like comic books or coffee and he or wine or whatever it would be.
Yes,
He would
yeah.
get so into it that he had to be the expert and like just you know, and then would just kind of like move on to the next thing. And so you know, there's just he
That
has this
sounds
long list of things that he's so into and just becomes the master at, and then it's like, okay, I got it.
he's so interesting to watch during warm-ups. He's got his thing he does. He does his shake-offs on the ice and he does his figure eights that he does. But he's one of the most interesting people to watch warm up before a game. Um and he's very routine and you're watching and you're like, "Okay." And then he's done. And then he's off the ice right at the exact mark every single game.
Yeah, I mean, the routine's everything for these guys, and it's some guys are different. Like some guys, I mean, I think of his former teammate, like Joe Pavelski, who would just sit after practice for hours and work on tipping shots, and like these, the stuff isn't an accident. You see Joe deflect a shot in a playoff game; it's because he's
He's
done that
doing
6 billion times after practice.
it. Yep. He's,
It's pretty amazing.
he's Captain America for a reason. Uh,
That's right.
what is coming down for the rest of for this latter half of 2024 that you are looking forward to?
Oh, you know, I think it's just to continue, you know, at the athletic for me in my career. You know, I'm really excited about our group and the stuff that we're doing in the space and audio and video, just continuing to like grow there and seek out opportunity and develop talent and work with our newsroom. Like, there's just so much. It's fun to be part of a company that's growing and ambitious, and you know, like I love all of that. And then you know, the book just you know I just got the we're doing the kind of the final touches on the manuscript, so getting that done and I'll be like once that's sent off to the printer get that out.
Check.
I'm yeah, I am ready, and then I can actually although this feels like a promotion interview for it, which it's not, I promise everyone I'm not here to
It's
promote the
not.
book.
It's not at all.
Then I'll be hitting that hard in the fall, which I actually enjoy. It's always fun to have those conversations. So
Yep. This is an interesting question that I just, I keep getting asked and being a podcast host, people are like, podcast is the big thing right now.
mhm.
Everybody's like, what's the next medium? And you being, having to see, the transition of journalism in the last 25 years.
Mhm.
What are people driving with right now? What's the medium people are really watching, listening, reading to for you guys?
I've just always been a proponent of having an open mind with that. And I even just think back to when I was a young reporter and Twitter was coming out,
Big
and
thing.
it was the big thing. And there was a lot of people in the newsroom where I was at that like that they were just not interested in it. And you know, there was a bit of the like that, like, who cares what I had for lunch? And it's like, well, no, there's actually a lot of information on Twitter and you can share information as a reporter. It's a great news source. And for me, it was transformative in my career because I was an early adopter and it just connected me with like the hockey Twitterverse and also sources. And I'm sure it led to at least two of my jobs. Like people like you know, that's often how they know you. So I've always just told people to be open-minded to whatever platform is, you know, you know, so like right now, you know, we're oftentimes we do like the most in-depth story, but I also realize there's people that either don't have the time or younger readers who would rather consume it on TikTok or short form video, you know, social video or Instagram stories. So like I'm like that's where we need to be. Like that's so we have to constantly be evolving, and if you want to reach that audience and if you want to reach a younger audience or whatever, you have to have an open mind. And then for us with the athletic, it's just like how do we do it so it aligns with our sensibilities and our DNA and our journalism. I mean, that's so that you're not like just imitating other people. So I think that's always a challenge is keep an open mind about the platform and then find a way to do it that aligns with kind of your core beliefs.
I think it's interesting. I'm like, I can't see past the mediums we have right now, but Twitter for me too. I keep Twitter purely for sports. I'm like,
Yeah.
somebody's injured. I'm like, it's on Twitter. Somebody's gonna tell me why, what is happening, and it's the best. It's one of the best sports sources for me most of the time.
Yeah, it's a great source, and I still think like I'm a big believer in audio. Like I think I think the connection that people make over audio, like if you have a consistent host and you're this person is in your ear for
Yes.
once a week, like that becomes really powerful. And I lived it with my podcast. Like I was at an airport and someone just they just heard me talking to like the gate agent or whatever, and they're like, "Hey," like they never would have recognized. Like they had no, they're like, they just heard my voice, and
I
there was
love
this
it.
connection because they just had heard me so many. So and it's the same way as a consumer. Like I'm like right now obsessed with the there's a podcast. I think it's 60 songs from the 90s or whatever. And it's a music podcast that I feel like I know the host, Rob. Like I'm like, oh, Rob and I are best friends, but really, like he has no idea who I am. And it's because that's such a powerful. If you connect with a host, it's extremely powerful. And so I love that as a platform still, even though
Yep.
podcast is a pretty mature market right now.
It is. It is a very mature market, but I think it's interesting because you do straddle the line sometimes of now you're having people who are like, "Well, I prefer video podcast over
Hmm.
audio podcast," but I'm like, but I just like audio because I like to get stuff done as as I'm walking to
That's right.
the airport, as I'm cleaning the house, as I'm out for a walk. I'm like, I don't want to have YouTube open or something like that to be watching a video podcast or dealing with it. But it is a very mature market that is just growing and growing still.
Yeah. How long have you been doing yours? I'm just curious, like how it's gone launching, and
Five
I'm
years.
assuming newer popcorn. Oh, it's been 5. So you're into it.
I'm in it. I am in the depths. You will be like episode 110 or something like
Oh,
that.
congratulations.
Yeah, so this is
Great.
we just did 100 in April. We did a big thing for it. So I'm like I'm in it now. I'm like I'm
That's awesome.
obsessed.
That's great. I mean, and that's half the battle is being consistent with posting and having, being reliable, right?
Yeah. I say all the time, I'm like every episode just getting a little bit better every year, making some small differences in how I'm doing
Hmm.
stuff. But it's constantly, I think, as you were saying, just you're constantly learning to try to figure out what are the best ways to get into your audience's hands.
Yeah.
My last question for you, Craig, is just what inspires you?
Oh, what inspires me? You know, I, I, I loved when I see people who are passionate about what they're doing. Like, what I mean? When you see whether it's an athlete or an artist or a podcast host, and there's like, so into music, and I'm really inspired by people who are just care deeply about something and are pursuing it, and um are risk takers. Like I love people that are like, you know what, all I can do is I have to own this coffee shop. Like it's, you know what I mean, and it's the only job, and I quit my huge corporate or whatever it is. Like that is I find that so inspiring. So anyone who's willing to just like pursue those passions and do it and be different and take chances, I'm really inspired by that.
I love it. And I think, we've been talking about it a lot, the storytelling aspect of it, just being able to sit down and actually hear the passion behind it and why they wanted to go do it. I'm like, yes, it fuels you. You're like,
Hmm.
oh, yep, I'm ready to go kind of tackle my world now and the stuff that I've been really wanting to do. I love hearing those stories.
Yeah, and I like to surround myself with those kind of people. I think that's the key, right? Like it's I mean, as we know, you end up acting like the people you surround yourself with. So I do. I just like to be around. And that's what was really fun about working in hockey is no matter who you were talking to, if it's a GM or a player, like they're the best at what they do. Like they're so committed and they're so passionate about it. You can't do it by doing it halfway. And I found that really stimulating.
Well, and like we said in the beginning of the episode, I grew up with Sparty. I grew up in a big baseball and football household, but hockey is number one for me. So it's always been one of those things that I've just constantly loved getting to learn about. I mean, I'm biased, but Gary Bettman's the best commissioner out there, and I love everything he does for
Oh wow.
for our
That's
game.
that's not a take I hear often when I'm talking to people out in the world. So that's good. Sounds like Gary would love to
I
hear
love
that.
Gary. I love Gary. Uh,
Wow. That's really funny.
um, but I it's the game of hockey has definitely it's one that is just incredible to learn about because every player, every GM, every coach, it's insightful to hear all those stories.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, Craig, thank you so much for taking the time with me today. I'm going to have Craig's socials linked down below as well as the link to Behind the Bench. And then when his new book comes out, we'll update this so he has his new book there. But just thank you, Craig, for taking the time and talking with me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Danielle.
Yeah, and as always, I will see you guys back here next time. Bye, y'all.